Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about unlocking shared intelligence across complex operational ecosystems. This is a super important and relevant topic, and I'm excited for what I think is going to be a very engaging conversation. My name is Toby. I am the CEO at Entopy, and I will be your host today. And the way this is going to work, I'm shortly going to introduce our fantastic panel. I'll ask each one of them to give a very brief introduction to themselves. And then we're going to move into a couple of slides. They're really there just to set the scene, to provide some context. And we will just mention quickly digital twins, AI, and of course I will take the opportunity to introduce Entopy to you all. Then we will get into the panel discussion. That's of course what we're all here for. So that's where we'll spend the majority of our time. There'll be a very brief opportunity for us to make a couple of announcements before going into Q&A, and that's obviously your opportunity to ask questions to our panel. So if you have a question, pop it into the chat box. We'll be sure to get through as many of those questions as we can. We are going to finish hot on 11:30. We want to be respectful to everyone's time, but this webinar is being recorded. And so as you've registered, you will get a link to the recording shortly after this webinar. So if you have to leave halfway through for whatever reason, that's absolutely fine. We'll be sure to get the recording out to you. So just sort of skipping into the panel introductions, I think it's really important when discussing a topic like this to have a broad range of perspectives. And we're very lucky to have that today. So if I could ask each of the panel to give a brief introduction. Jake, if I can start with you, if you can introduce yourself and your organization, please.
Thanks, Toby. My name is Jake Story. I'm the CFO of Harwich Haven Authority. We're a port authority, a trust port, which means we have no shareholders and we don't get any money from the government, but only from the shipping lines that call into our jurisdiction. I can talk more about that in relation to our digital twin later on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Yuri, perhaps if you could do the same.
Sure, thanks, Toby. I'm Yuri Moreda. I'm the Digital Twin Manager for Connected Places Catapult, where I really have the privilege here of overseeing the UK's Digital Twin Hub, which is a dynamic platform really designed to accelerate digital twin adoption by connecting experts, researchers, and policymakers. And my role really involves in uniting innovators to drive adoption of digital twin through community-led initiatives and stakeholder collaborations.
Amazing. Thank you, Yuri. And finally, Chris, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and your organization, please.
Thanks, Toby. Yeah, Chris Martin. I'm the lawyer on the call, a partner at Pinsent Masons. We are a large international commercial law firm. I specialise in technology and data matters. I'm here because I've worked on a number of digital twin projects and indeed wider projects to implement open and shared data ecosystems, some of which we'll talk about on today's webinar.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we really, like I said, we've got a broad range of perspectives. We've got innovation and pioneering industry leaders, communities, and obviously the legal perspective. So I think we're well set to discuss this important topic. To sort of add some flavor and context and background, one of the things that we asked everyone to do when registering for this webinar was to answer the question, what are the biggest barriers to adopting digital twin? And the standout winner was lack of knowledge. Data sharing is of course second. We expected that, but the lack of knowledge point really kind of highlighted to us that we are very much in the infancy of this technology class. It hasn't had its kind of aha moment. It's not quite mainstream yet. I think for people like myself that live in a digital twin bubble, I hear about it every day. But when talking on forums like this, I think it's important to address this. So this led me to start by answering the question, what is a digital twin? And in very simple high-level terms, it is a digital replica of a physical thing, process, or system. It is as simple as that. It's a term that has been somewhat hijacked and is used all over the place. But when thinking about it, just think about it as a digital replica of a thing, process, or system. There are two kind of acid tests of whether it's a true digital twin. The first is it needs to be able to predict and simulate with accuracy moving forward. And the second is that there needs to be a two-way data exchange between the physical thing or process or system and the digital counterpart. Now, Some people will focus on building digital twins of things. Maybe let's take a component part within a car, for example. You might want to stress test scenarios such as extreme heat before actually building that component, and digital twins allow you to do that. But from a point of shared intelligence across complex ecosystems, we're seeing digital twins emerge across processes and systems. So these are road networks, ports, critical infrastructure, that sort of thing. And actually, it's a mystical term that's kind of hiding in plain sight. I read an article that was quite interesting a few months ago, which talked about digital twin Uberifying businesses. And if you think about Uber, if we make this quite tangible, that is a digital twin. You have many parts or aspects of that system or process that are feeding data up to the digital counterpart. You can see where various drivers are, for example, and you can interact with the twin yourself by sharing your location and interacting and calling one of those cars. So this is not a new concept. It's here in plain sight today. But I think what's going to be happening over the next few years is we're going to see more and more digital twins start to emerge across kind of real operational ecosystems such as those we're going to discuss today. I think there's also an important point, which is the convergence of what we're calling generative AI with digital twins and the important role that digital twin has to play in what we're calling agentic AI. And if you can just imagine being able to talk to your business, ask questions of your business, test scenarios and so on from your mobile phone, I think we can all agree that's quite an exciting and powerful tool, especially when you consider it can talk to the web and also hold some memory. So that brings me on to who are Entopy. Well, you guessed it, we're a digital twin company. We are a digital twin company that specializes in what we call AI-enabled digital twin, and we're here to deliver decision intelligence through digital twin to operators and strategic decision makers across critical infrastructure. What's unique about Entopy is our approach. So we look at a system or process and we break it down to its smallest component parts. We then deploy small, what we call AI micro models that predict aspects of that operation or environment, and their outputs feed into workflows together with real-time data that allows us to orchestrate huge amounts of intelligence across a really, really complicated process or system to deliver decision intelligence through prediction and simulation. So what you're seeing is effectively a sort of scientist's sketch of a digital twin on screen. And when we think about what these kind of operational ecosystems, these complex operational ecosystems can look like, this picture, I think, says 1,000 words. What you're looking at there is the OOCL Felixstowe. This is what we call a Megamax vessel. So it's 400 meters in length and can weigh up to 280,000 tons. And this is, I think, a picture of it making its maiden call at the port of Felixstowe, which is, of course, where Harwich Haven and Jake and his colleagues are operational today. And I think everyone can, when you start to think about a 400-meter long vessel that weighs that much and is that big, I think everyone can probably appreciate that that is a very, very complex operation to get a vessel like this to berth safely alongside at the UK's busiest container port. And if just before we go into the panel discussion, I just wanted to sort of highlight and outline this particular ecosystem, because I think this acts as a really, really good context setter for the discussion we're going to have today. So when a vessel arrives, it is met by a pilot. These are maritime pilots that are trained specifically in their respective ports. So they have extreme knowledge around the waterways and the conditions. So they go aboard and assist the vessel master to navigate the last few miles. And as the vessel moves through the channel waterways to Felixstowe, it is monitored by a team of VTS officers, which stands for Vessel Tracking System. And they're essentially monitoring to ensure safe passage. Both the pilots and the VTS officers are managed by the Harwich Haven Authority. As the vessel gets closer to its berth, it is then met by tugboats, which go out to assist with its final manoeuvring. This is run by a towage provider, in this case called Svitzer, so another very large organization. And they help the vessel to get safely alongside, where the process of unloading and loading containers onto these enormous vessels begins. That process is run by the terminal operator, which in this case is Hutchison Ports UK. And then when the vessel is ready to depart, that process essentially repeats, but in reverse. So you can sort of see we've got 4, if you include the vessel operator, 4 sizable organizations that are working very closely together and in a very sort of interconnected way to manage this very complicated operation. And this is exactly what we mean when we talk about complex operational ecosystems. And this is where we think technologies like digital twin can help to unlock shared intelligence to improve the efficiency and service levels of such an operation. So this, I think, is a really good chance for me to segue in to our panel discussion. And I'd like to start, if I may, with you, Jake, because obviously we've been working together now for a few months, a number of months, to deploy a digital twin across the ecosystem that we've just seen. And it would be sensible if you wouldn't mind just giving our audience a bit of an overview of what it is we're trying to achieve, and I suppose how we're getting on.
Yes, thanks, Toby, and thank you for that introduction. You summarised the problem we had. We had a problem we needed a solution for, and we came to the conclusion that being able to create a digital twin and work with our partners, Switzer and Hutchinson UK, to optimise and improve the port call would be of huge value to ourselves financially, but also reputationally and environmentally. How I explain our relationship and roles is that collectively the 3 of us have to work together to make sure the vessels get in and out safely, but also perform their duties. Those 400-meter vessels most probably have $1 billion worth of cargo on board. They're high valuable assets. So how we've looked at the problem is to conceptualize it from 3 different lenses. So this digital twin will solve help to solve our problems in terms of communication and sharing of intelligence across the ecosystem. So we'll have an operational perspective for the next 48 hours. So we can coordinate with Felixstowe and the towage providers to make sure jointly and collectively we all have the right resources in the right places, but also be able to do more forward planning for the next 5 to 7 days, but also use it as a strategic tool to understand where the constraint exists within the ecosystem. And then we can actually maximize the use of that constraint or alleviate it. So we can use it as a tool for strategic investments. We're already talking about, can we improve the sea access to enable more two-way passage of vessels? That could cost 100, 200 million pounds. So what's the best way of investing that money? Is it best doing that way, or best doing it through Felixstowe in terms of more cranes, more labor, or have more tugs or tug crews? So this tool will enable us to unlock huge amounts of collective profit for all the stakeholders. Doing our job correctly means supermarkets are full. Felixstowe has about 35 to 40% of UK container traffic. So the effective use of these vessels is a national importance to make sure it's keeping the supply chain running. So that's why we invested and looked to develop a digital twin yourself.
Amazing. Thank you, Jake. I think that's a really, really good real world example of what is quite an abstract concept. And hopefully that helps to bring this to life. If I could next turn to you, Nuri, because of course, what Jake's just described is a digital twin that is across an ecosystem. There's a lot of data that requires sharing across that ecosystem. And this is an example of that. But, you know, as a leading community manager of digital twins in the UK, is this kind of scenario a common one that you're seeing? Are you seeing this kind of concept of connected digital twins and that requirement for data sharing between stakeholders often?
Yes, absolutely. Data sharing is really fundamental to the success of digital twins. And I think one of the biggest lessons we've learned at the DT Hub is that when organizations view data as a shared asset, the models they build really become significantly accurate and actionable. And we've seen various examples across multiple sectors, whether it's transport, utilities, built environments. When they pull the data to create a more sort of holistic digital twin, that broader perspective really helps uncover different operational efficiencies. It helps to reduce duplication of effort. And I think it ultimately can lead to better outcomes in areas like infrastructure and resilience, as well as public safety. But at the same time, where data remains siloed, digital twins tend to offer a narrow view. But when stakeholders align, resulting in the model's benefits can end up becoming richer. And I think the predictive analytics can become more accurate. Risk assessments can, again, help become more robust and decision-making more confident. And I think it's that shared data foundation that truly supercharges the whole of digital twins value. And of course, it'll be remiss of me by saying sharing data requires trust, and establishing robust government frameworks like the ones we advocate through DT Hub really helps all parties feel secure about the issues like privacy, security, and IP. And that framework is what ultimately drives that broader ecosystem's participation, as well as the extension of better digital twins via our Gemini principles.
Brilliant, amazing, thank you. And so you know, this concept of data sharing, obviously we have to come to you, Chris, when talking about this sort of thing, because I can imagine this is very, very complicated. If you've got multiple commercial organizations that are looking to, you know, even if it's so obvious that a digital twin is going to be valuable to the ecosystem, you can imagine still that need to have data shared across various stakeholders is quite a complicated one. So there's obvious challenges that spring to mind, but from your point of view, what models have you seen that help us to unlock this and help us to overcome these sort of data sharing barriers to unlock this shared intelligence?
Thanks, Toby. Yeah, I mean, I think you know, you're right. Whenever you're looking at implementing an effective data sharing infrastructure or ecosystem, you do need to think about the barriers, and you need to think about what will be the most effective model to sort of meet the needs of the organizations within that sharing ecosystem. And I guess the answer in terms of model is there's no one size that fits all. So the approach that we take and that we've seen to be effective on projects, and let me give you an example. We've worked on a project in the water sector called Stream, which is looking to create an open and shared data ecosystem that will share data amongst the UK's water companies in a way which will enable the sector to tackle systemic issues, you know, water leakage, environmental issues, pollution, but also potentially data that can be used to implement digital twin solutions. So they are, you know, I think the first step is really with that project, and more generally, the first step is to take a step back and think about the objectives of the parties. What do the organizations involved in the data sharing ecosystem want to achieve, and what is the overall purpose of the sharing of data, in this case, to implement a digital twin solution? Only by understanding those objectives can you come up with the right model. We see lots of models in the market. So if we take open banking, you know, there you have essentially a corporate model. There's a corporate vehicle, a separate company established to implement and run open banking, you know, shared data, shared and open data infrastructure. We see contractual models. So we've worked on projects with central government to implement shared data ecosystems using collaboration agreements and consortium agreements. So, you know, there are various options. The first step, understand the objectives of the parties, understanding the nature of the data that you want to share. How sensitive is that data? If it's data, and this is particularly relevant to digital twins, if it's data relating to critical national infrastructure, or if it's data relating to individuals, then clearly that has a degree of sensitivity that means which needs to be taken account of in the model that you adopt with appropriate safeguards. So mapping the data ecosystem and understanding the nature of the data and the nature of the organization sharing the data really will inform your decision-making process around the model that you adopt. And the learnings from that initial discovery phase can then be sort of baked into the approach that you take, whether you approach it through a contractual model, a corporate model, or some other structure. We obviously also see structures which are driven by regulation and government. So if you look at the rollout of smart meters in the UK, there's a very kind of strict regulatory regime that sets out how smart meter data can be shared across the energy system and beyond. You're currently going through Parliament. We have the Data Access Bill, which will also offer mechanisms for sharing data more effectively. All of that relevant to digital twins. All of that needs to be considered at the outset of the project so that you design and then implement a data sharing infrastructure that places compliance at its heart. And we'll come on to talk about this. We talk about compliance as an enabler. Thinking about any legal and commercial barriers or hurdles up front enables you to design an approach which best, enables you to comply with regulatory and legal requirements in the model that you take forwards.
Brilliant. And so I think, going back to the original, the title of this around unlocking shared intelligence, it feels like it's unlocking data sharing is a key part of unlocking that shared intelligence. And and you've just given a really good summary of some of the models that you've seen. But I suppose just to follow on from that question, if you could just perhaps talk to potential incentives. So, data is an asset, it has a value. And if I'm an organization and I'm looking at this potential to unlock shared intelligence across the ecosystem I operate within, great. But I'm still a bit nervous about the fact that this data that I'm being asked to give up has a value. What sort of incentive mechanisms have you seen deployed successfully in your world, Chris?
So, this is so important in our experience. In my first spiel there, I talked quite a lot about barriers and compliance and all of that. But actually, the key to success is, in our experience, is at the outset identifying the benefits to all stakeholders involved in the data sharing ecosystem and identifying the benefits to all for participating. Jake touched on that when he explained the project that they're working on, where clearly there are identifiable benefits for a number of different organizations who are involved in the ecosystem in which he operates. And so this is really critical, and it does go back to that that ecosystem mapping, really mapping out who the providers of the data will be, understanding their role, understanding what benefits they may accrue by actually participating in the data sharing ecosystem, and being able to enunciate and explain those benefits and reflect them in the contractual or legal approach that you take. So if you take my stream example again, that ecosystem potentially contains the water companies themselves, obviously, but also commercial partners, so supply chain partners who may wish to use data to carry out infrastructure or other works for the water industry, academic or research partners who will be interested in the data from the perspective of carrying out research on the effectiveness or otherwise of the water sector, and then technology suppliers who are developing solutions that can help manage and optimize the way our water industry works. Each of those parties has a different skin in the game and a different reason to want to both provide data and use data. So understanding that is kind of critical, and then baking those benefits into the governance and sort of legal model that you adopt is kind of key. Is key really, but definitely if you think about carrot and stick, carrot in our experience is more effective. The stick may be appropriate. We have seen, government policymakers legislate to actually require regulated entities to share data or make data open. The energy system has quite a sophisticated regulatory framework that does require data to be shared and transferred in a particular way, and that's probably going to develop and evolve further as a result of the kind of ongoing Ofgem supported project to implement a data sharing infrastructure across our energy sector. And all of these projects are really going to help us as we look to implement digital twins, whether at an industry level or more broadly. And it is about defining the benefits within those projects for those that are going to provide the data and those that are going to use the data.
Yeah, no, I think we're probably going to touch on, I mean, you could have an entire webinar around what sticks are going to be used as we all kind of collectively try to unlock efficiencies through digital and AI. But I think the points you just made there around, you know, clear purpose, you know, recognizing that this is sometimes a sensitive topic and ensuring ownership and lines are drawn that are very, very clear. I think they're very interesting points. And Jake, of course, you're doing this right now. So I suppose my question, following on from, you know, that we're moving heavily into data sharing, of course, which is exactly where we expected to go. But how have you overcome some of these challenges? Because if you've been able to get quite far along in your journey with a digital twin and data sharing across that ecosystem.
We've been quite fortunate because as the Port Authority, we were responsible for the navigational safety of these huge vessels coming in and out of the Harwich Haven and particularly Port of Felixstowe. So we have a very good, long-established relationship with all the various stakeholders and partners, the shipping lines, the Port of Felixstowe, Hutchinson in the UK, and Svitzer. So we already were sharing data, but we were sharing it very, very badly. So we haven't had a huge amount of issues. There's always a commercial element that you have to be mindful of. But also we had an established shared purpose already in existence. So this digital twin is about getting to the next level to improve operational effectiveness and efficiency for our common customers, but also for ourselves, but also be able to unlock future value in terms of new business and new revenues for all the stakeholders. So there hasn't really been any stick. I think the biggest challenge has been, well, digital twin, what does that actually mean? And people's lack of knowledge as it came out of the survey to begin with. Getting people comfortable with what you're doing, that you're actually not taking a pot of gold away from them and using it and commercializing yourself. So being open and honest about a shared goal, collaborating and listening to people's concerns and trying to find tools and techniques to alleviate them where possible. But it's been a very productive relationship, and hopefully in the next few weeks we'll have a huge asset that we can work and use collectively for the common good with our shipping lines, our customers, and the UK PLC.
Amazing. So it's really a sense of almost as an educational component to it. Trust, as Nuri mentioned earlier on in the conversation, is absolutely central. Transparency, being open, and that kind of common purpose, that defined purpose, which I know is part of one of the frameworks that you referenced, Nuri, in your introduction. And Chris, you did touch on the role of potential regulatory bodies and governments in this situation. Nuri, if I can come to you, from your point of view in terms of what you're seeing, what role do you see regulators and governments having in unlocking this kind of shared intelligence? You know, do you see it very much as a stick, or do you see their role as kind of educational, as incentivizing, a bit of both? How do you see that going?
That's a really interesting and really good question, actually. From what I've observed, the mindset of data is my oil is really a huge challenge. Many organizations still see data as a proprietary resource or their crown jewel, but fundamentally, the role of government and regulators is really crucial in changing that mindset by layering how clear, consistent frameworks for data exchange that is needed. And I suppose building on Chris's point, I think regulatory bodies can create guidelines and incentives, which is everything from streamlined data protection legislation to new policy measures to help encourage open data platforms. And it's these measures that can really help reduce uncertainty, risk for businesses. Thus, I think it's probably one of the layers that makes it easy to justify data sharing. At Connected Places Catapult, we're seeing some really interesting progress in the UK with initiatives like Smart Data Council that are emerging as part of the data sharing infrastructure proposals. And these aim to establish the rules of the game so that companies really do understand what's permissible and what's beneficial. And once the clarity really is there, we feel that organizations are more willing to collaborate. On the ground, at the DT Hub, we're already trying to put this into action. So our Firebox program helps demonstrate how secure but structured data sharing can really benefit all parties. And when we have clear policy guidelines in place, like those that are encouraged by government, initiatives such as what we're doing at Firebox projects can go even further because you have the legal and commercial parameters already mapped out. So it should be hopefully smooth sailing from then on.
Brilliant. So sort of taking a bit of a wearing many hats sort of role. It's not seismic in terms of you will share data. It's setting up these kind of educational forums, bringing various projects together, bringing stakeholders together, to kind of try and share the benefits of this first and foremost, but also potentially offering frameworks to unlock some of the intractable challenges that we're seeing in terms of data sharing, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. This is fascinating. This is great. This is exactly what I was hoping for. I mean, it's such a meaty topic, and we've dived into data sharing pretty aggressively quite early on. But I suppose I want to sort of bring it back to the kind of outputs of these digital twins. So, you know, data sharing is an enabler. What are the outputs of these digital twins? What sorts of things, tangible things, can we potentially expect to see from some of these models? And you know, the world's obviously aggressively moving into AI. Generative AI is the thing that's catching most people's attention. But of course, AI has many flavors, and many of the flavors of AI, shall we say, have been around long before we saw the sort of emergence of large language models. I want to come to you again, Jake, seeing as you've got, you know, such a rich experience of this. And I wanted to ask a question around how you're seeing within the digital twin artificial intelligence playing a role in improving decision making.
As I mentioned earlier, utilizing the resources effectively across our ecosystem, across the three stakeholders. All of us have to be effective at the right time for the vessel to move, to arrive, to depart, to be loaded, and to be discharged. What the digital twin will enable us to do is to understand the capacity, the demand on our ecosystem, and work out the resources that we need in the near future to better resource planning, either getting in more resources or delaying certain activities, to making sure that vessels aren't unduly delayed. And for us, that will be critical. I'm going to say us in terms of the ecosystem, but also how to manage improvements. What will actually unlock more value for our stakeholders? Is it one particular element of the triangle needing to invest in resources, whether it's operational or capital resources? But being able to quantify that, so you can actually say, well, I'll actually invest 10 million doing this. This will actually generate 8 million of additional revenue a year. Do we make that investment? That type of thing is a no-brainer. But you actually have a strategic tool that you actually can use to monetize investment and decision-making process, as well as actually using it on an operational basis. So it's actually a tool that I think once we got in place, we'll realize that how on earth do we survive without it.
So the AI within the digital twin is predicting aspects of the operation, very specific aspects of the operation, and they play into providing this is going to happen, giving you the heads up in terms of we can make that decision.
Yes. Do we have enough tugs? Do we have enough tug crew? Do we have enough pilots? Do we need more crane activity to get the vessel out? And do we have enough tide in terms of the vessel's draft? All those factors will be brought into the decision-making process, which will be sort of driven by the relationship between the three of us, Hutchinson, UK, and Switzer. So it's being able to ask the so what happens now in 2 days' time, given this type of demand has been put onto the system. Okay, we need to get more pilots on board, or we need to get more tug crew available because of the demand coming in. So we're actually proactive and preventing the system sort of stalling or being ineffective.
And digital twins, the methodology or the framework that allows us to hook lots of these AI models and real-time data sources together, of course. So, you know, because the reason I want to dwell on this a little bit is just because I think when people are thinking, you know, I speak to so many people. The amount of conversations I've had with people where they've said, we need to adopt AI. And it's like, okay, why? Well, because it's a strategic objective for our business to adopt AI. And this is quite an abstract concept. And I think people are kind of grappling with, we intuitively think this technology is going to be valuable to our business, and we think it's going to be very disruptive, and we want to be ahead of that curve, but we don't quite know how. And all we're seeing is these chatbots that are brilliant at writing content and generating content and so on. And finding these tangible applications within critical infrastructure, within operational environments, within real world things is quite challenging. And I wanted to make that distinction between digital twin, potentially bridging that gap and bringing some of these models together. But of course, when you're starting to generate data, when models, when AIs are starting to generate data, that potentially creates another legal challenge, right? So I know, for example, if you generate content on ChatGPT, the ownership of that content has been subject to quite a bit of debate. Chris, I'm jumping around quite a lot here, but we've just heard about how AI and digital twin can actually drive decision making and create real value. Let's look at the negative. Who owns the outputs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great question, Toby. And we actually have a question, and I notice as well from Daniel, which is quite relevant to this, that I think we should probably try and pick up in considering the role of AI in data ecosystems, and indeed specifically in terms of digital twins. And Daniel's really asking, what are and he rightly identifies something we've not really focused on, which is some of the one of the big barriers to data sharing is quality and standards of data, and then the consequential maybe loss of trust if data is not of a sufficient quality. So can AI help solve the quality and standards side of things, and does it impact on the trust piece? So it's a really good question, and I think it actually goes into what you've just asked, Toby. So you talk about so AI does change a lot. Some people say AI changes everything. It does change a lot, and it definitely has potential legal consequences, which do feed into Daniel's point around trust. So you talked about ownership of the outputs of the AI, Toby. That is a perfect example of an area where there is a lack of certainty, and it then bleeds into the approach you have to take contractually to ensure that if you are deploying AI across your data ecosystem or in a digital twin environment, you're very clear as to who is responsible for providing input data, who may own the output data or control the output data, and who ultimately is responsible if the AI does not deliver accuracy or causes issues which subsequently result in liability. So your question was on intellectual property. Daniel's question is focused on potential trust implications of deploying AI. I think there are two great examples of where, as lawyers, we look at the use of AI and see issues that need to be addressed in some way. They can be addressed contractually, they can be addressed through good AI governance within our organization, such that you're only using AI in a way that's appropriate. I think there are other potential issues that we should talk about as well, Toby. So we are seeing obviously more regulation now, which is designed to regulate the way that AI is used and deployed. Most obviously, we see, I suppose, what's currently the gold standard of regulation in the EU with the EU AI Act, which has extraterritorial effect, so could affect UK businesses, for example, who are deploying AI in a similar way to data protection law and GDPR. So we will see more regulation. Different governments will take different approaches. So in the UK, we see the policymakers want to take a pro-innovation approach. So no specific plan to have the equivalent of the EU AI Act, but we will see individual regulators issuing guidance to their sectors around how AI is to be used. We've seen Ofgem do that in the energy sector. So in deploying AI, we will obviously have to be cognizant of that regulation and that guidance and bake it into the models and approaches we're taking in terms of deployment AI, not only in a digital twin environment, but more broadly. So that's another sort of legal aspect. alongside that, and there is a question about data protection in the chat. Alongside that, we need to be mindful of compliance from a data protection perspective, which very much sits alongside AI if you're using AI on data which is personal data. So the regulatory regime begins to become quite complex around the deployment of that AI solution within a digital twin environment where data is maybe being shared from multiple sources and being used within the AI system. So definitely, I think it is, if not a game changer in terms of the legal piece, it's definitely a significant factor that would need to be taken account of when you're designing your data sharing infrastructure.
Brilliant. I think there's a lot to think about, right? And hopefully this is interesting to people and it's not terrifying them. But I think there's a huge prize, but there is a lot to think about as we move towards it.
And on that is a very good point, Toby. I'm not meaning to be sort of the sort of doom and gloom lawyer. Definitely, a lot of this, it's just a case of, I think, designing and thinking about these things up front so that you actually bake it into your governance and contractual and legal model for the digital twin and take account of it up front. And that actually goes to Daniel's actual question about trust, that AI, I think, if used properly and it's a good model and is accurate, can enhance trust. But actually, there is a big risk of it damaging trust. If actually it's not effective and there's a lot of hallucinations and the outputs are not great, then absolutely that could undermine trust that you've otherwise gained through the way you've set up your data sharing. And from a lawyer's perspective, we begin then to think about liability. Well, what if, it's not a good model and it's causing issues? If that causes loss or damage to somebody, who's actually responsible for that?
No, I completely agree with you, and I think these are super important points, and they need to be addressed at the earliest possible moment in the adoption cycle. But there's lots of questions now starting to come through into the chat, and I'm keen to get to them. But my final question to the panel, to you specifically, Nuri, just sort of closing this fascinating discussion off, is kind of a looking forward kind of thing with digital twin. We've discussed kind of where we are, the barriers to adopting it, the barriers to unlocking shared intelligence, data sharing, the use of AI, and so on. But I mentioned in one of the slides actually this convergence between generative AI, large language models, and digital twins. And Chris, you've just mentioned there the fact that some of these technologies, particularly on the generative AI side, have a reputation for hallucinating and not being able to access relevant data and actually therefore giving relatively useless answers. Nuri, from your perspective, obviously you're at the forefront of what's happening in the digital twin world. Do you see digital twin and Gen AI sort of working together? Do you see digital twin having an important role within that conversation?
Yes, definitely. I do. I think it's important to note Chris's comments behind his thoughts, which has some strong merits to how we balance. But I think generative AI and LLMs really thrive on data, and digital twins are a goldmine for enabling kind of structured real-time information about how physical and organizational systems work. And when you merge the two, you create, I think, a very strong, powerful feedback loops. And AI helps refine the twins' accuracy, which in turn provides data that can really help improve those AI outputs. For instance, we've seen various examples at the DT Hub from innovators where they showcase how AI can analyze massive data sets from the twin to deliver predictive insights, like forecasting maintenance issues in infrastructure or simulating various what-if scenarios. But meanwhile, LLM can help really extract human-readable intelligence from larger volumes and sensor data. And these are examples that are provided when they showcase those case studies, which enables quicker decision making from technical stakeholders. And these examples that DT Hub members are already sharing in our weekly Gemini calls, case studies events every Tuesday, or highlighting the potential, but also discussing some of the challenges around areas such as what Chris has highlighted. But ultimately, I think these AI models as they become more commoditized, the barrier to entry drops. And I think that's great news, especially for smaller companies and for public agencies looking to deploy digital twins, because they can really tap into that advanced analytics and that NPL without the huge custom development costs. And as DT Hub looks ahead, we see digital twins as really the foundational layer for enabling AI-driven optimization at scale. And once hoping that all the structures are behind and we have a standardized approach to data collection and sharing, like what we're advocating at DT Hub, that these AI models will have more reliable inputs, generating better insights with trust, with strong governance from everything from supply chain to urban planning, which is what we're hoping to work for with a breadth of different stakeholders.
Brilliant. So yeah, so you see them as as connected. You see them
Absolutely
very much as connected. Digital twin providing the structure and the access to the data, and the LLM potentially providing a nice and powerful interface. Brilliant. So thank you so much for that conversation so far. I want to dive into the questions. We have a number of questions in the chat now, and I'll start to go through them. To the audience, if you have questions that you want to ask of this panel, please pop them into the Q&A field now. It's nice and easy. I think I've got both the chat and the Q&A up. So pop your question in where it looks obvious, and we'll see whether we can get them answered. Just before we go into that Q&A, I just want to make a couple of announcements. So the first is that Entopy will be exhibiting at Big Data and AI World on the 12th and 13th of March. That's at the XL in London. It's part of Tech Show London. We're going to be down there for both days, and you will see a demonstration of the first iteration of our AI agent there as well. So there's some really, really exciting stuff that we're going to be showcasing at that event. So if you're around, pop along. It's a free event, and we'd love to see you. The second announcement is we are going to be doing the draw for those lucky 5 people that registered for this webinar to win a Entopy hoodie. These are super exclusive. I think they're going on eBay for about £2,000. So you know, be sure to look out for that prize draw. We will do that. I don't quite know how we're going to do that. Someone had the idea of doing a live stream, which just sounds horrendous. So we'll probably just do something online and ship them out by email. But that will be on Friday this week. And if you are lucky to win one of those hoodies, we will be in touch. So we've got sort of 10-15 minutes left. Like I said, we are going to finish hot on 11:30. But we've got a few questions, and I just want to put these to the panel. There's a couple of really meaty ones in here, guys, so brace yourselves. Daniel Block, I think, Chris, you've already mentioned this, but I just wanted to put this out to the rest of the group. So the question is, in attempting to solve the data sharing problem, the biggest barriers appear to be the quality and standards of data coupled with trust. With AI solutions possibly in a position to address the quality and standards side, do you think the use of AI helps or hinders the trust aspect? Like I said, Chris, you've touched on this already, but I wonder if any of the panel want to come in and add any comments to that, or Chris, whether you wanted to elaborate further. No, I mean, I can give my opinion on this. I think Jake nailed it earlier in terms of trying to get that collaborative spirit throughout an ecosystem, throughout all of the stakeholders, and you know, moving forward with transparency around what you're trying to achieve as early on as possible, and making that message quite simple is the foundations of being able to build trust with this technology. Of course, you also, from a technician's point of view, you know, these technologies, it's all about accuracy. Okay, so if you're delivering garbage, it's not going to take long for the trust in the outputs from AI models to dwindle. So we spend a huge amount of time testing, stress testing all of the models that we deploy. A big part of the micro models approach is for us to be able to go into much smaller, more granular aspects of an operation, which helps with that testing process. And so that the data that we are outputting from the network of AI models that we deploy is accurate, and therefore the intelligence gradually builds trust. But it's the old adage. It takes a year to build trust. It takes a day to lose it. So we have to be very, very vigilant on this. This question, the next one down, is around personal data sharing. And Article 6 lawful. But this is a question for you, Chris. It's where personal data sharing is involved in the digital twin, how do you ensure against further incompatible processing and having an Article 6 lawful base brackets and possibly Article 9 condition? I'm going to confess I don't understand what any of that means.
Yeah, so that's fine. Come to me, Jake. I mean, Toby. I mean, health warning. I am not a data protection lawyer specialist, but all my projects are heavily involved our privacy team. So I think this actually goes to the heart of what I said earlier around compliance as an enabler and thinking through upfront the potential legal and regulatory complications and implications of implementing data sharing or digital twins in a particular way. And the person asked the question is absolutely right. I mean, one of those things is not necessarily just about lawful processing of personal data by an organization that's collected that data. It's that if that data enters the ecosystem, how do you control and ensure that there is not unlawful processing of that data further down the line by another stakeholder within the data ecosystem? And it's absolutely critical that that is thought about up front and that you, as part of your data ecosystem mapping, you're looking at that through a privacy lens as well. So there's obviously various ways to address that. It can be addressed contractually in terms of arrangements with the data subject, but also the way that you control the use of data contractually amongst the participants in the data ecosystem. But also what we've seen in some of the digital twin projects we've worked on is that using technical solutions to try and address that issue in terms of permissioning systems that only allow access to certain categories of data for certain purposes or by certain members of the data ecosystem, and also permissioning systems that enable you to turn access off and on. So, you know, that maybe an individual organization is allowed to use a particular data set or piece of data for a particular purpose, but once that purpose is served, that access is turned off. Because, you know, most of the models we're seeing now are sort of decentralized in that you're not, the data does not, you're not physically or you're not digitally transferring the data to another organization. They're able to access it remotely through a particular system. So having an understanding of the technical solution and how people access personal data and the measures that are put in place technically to ensure that access is appropriate, overlaid with appropriate legal mechanisms and privacy policies, good privacy governance, and appropriate contractual provisions is absolutely critical. And the biggest thing that can destroy trust, if we're talking about trust, is for a project or an organization to be found to be acting unlawfully and breaching the rights of data subjects or using data in a way which is unethical. So, I mean, it's absolutely critical to think about all these things up front and get appropriate legal advice and think about these sorts of consequences.
It's so important. There's another question in here. I'm going to pick Simon Collery's question. I think it's a really interesting one. I'll just read the question, and panel come in when you want to. But the question or the statement is: one objective to the use of generative AI for safety critical processes is that it should be of more use to people who don't have advanced knowledge and skills of their field. But if they don't have this knowledge and skills, they are not able to avoid the risks associated with letting generative AI replace those with the requisite competence. So it's not useful to those with the competence and not safe for those without the competence. It's an interesting paradigm. But within that question, there's a really, really important point that I wanted to pick up on. I'll just let the panel sort of digest that and come with their wonderful answers that are going to be much better than mine. But there is this concept of AI replacing people. And that's sort of there's a hint of that in that question, I think. And I just wanted to sort of offer my 2 pence on this because I don't think it will. I fundamentally don't believe that AI is going to replace. I think it's going to change certain aspects of the job, but I think it's a huge enabler for human beings, and the handoff function that is required between AI models and the actual action that is taken is critical for exactly this reason. You know, the AI is nascent, digital twins are nascent, AI-enabled digital twins are nascent. They're not always going to be right. So having that human handoff is really important. But also, we've seen this technology actually being used by, you know, absolute experts in the field, because it just gives them, you know, preemptive knowledge that they otherwise didn't have. And in the right hands, AI given to a hugely competent individual is a very, very powerful thing. But it's a symbiotic thing. I just wanted to pull up on that point. I don't know, panel, if any of you have.
I have strong views about it. I mean, Harwich Haven Authority is a port authority. The number one thing is the safe navigation of vessels in and out of the harbour in our jurisdiction. So it's always safety first. So we have a separate safety critical system. So we ensure that no vessel will be allowed to move unless it can be done safely. What this tool will do will enable better resource planning. And coming back onto the other point, we don't see this as a cost-saving measure. We see this as an ability to increase our revenue and our profitability by using shared intelligence and in creating additional value for ourselves and other stakeholders. So we see it as a tool for supporting very experienced and highly trained personnel to do things better and to provide it as a great resource planning tool to enable better decisions to be made.
Thank you. Does anyone? I completely agree. And I can see, Simon, you've come back at the bottom, so I completely acknowledge that point. Does anyone else have any comments on that particular point? No, I think we've got time for one more question. I'm just trying to pick, because there's a few in here. I'm just going to try and pick. So let's pick up this one. It's from Jack Smith. So it talks about a great discussion. I can really envisage the real world implementation across many industries, especially the property and development industry that I am involved in. However, data silos between developers, local authorities, and service providers pose the biggest barrier to progress. So this is very relevant to what we've discussed. How do the panelists envisage the best way to break down barriers where objectives and benefits vary between stakeholders? Who wants to go first?
Toby, I might come in here. I mean, I know it's not a particularly legal question, but as it happens, we're actually advising a developer on a big London development where, so it's a new development, so it's not an existing ecosystem. So the benefit they have is they can design a digital and data infrastructure for this new development. But I mean, Jack's question is absolutely spot on, because we're seeing a lot of interest from real estate clients in digital twins, but also specifically on how to use data in a way which optimizes what they do and potentially also to monetize and generate revenue. And there definitely are barriers in that industry around the way that people like developers, local authorities, suppliers, tenants within a built environment operate. And I think it is actually all about sitting down, mapping that ecosystem, looking at the role that each of these organizations plays within that built environment, understanding potential benefits for each, and actually going out to them, to the ecosystem, and really selling those benefits to the organizations, and then looking to design a way of sharing data that reflects the needs of those individuals. And that's absolutely what we're doing in this London project. So, the view of a tenant who runs a food and beverage outlet within this development as to how data should be used, and the things like point of sale data that they generate, or data about how people move around the development, will be quite different from an organization that operates a hotel in that development or residential accommodation, or the local authority who might be responsible for managing things within that built environment. So you really do have to sit down and understand what each of those stakeholder groups is going to get out of sharing data that is within their silo. as Jack puts it. So yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's great opportunities in that space, including from a digital twin perspective.
No, I completely agree. I think we've got time for maybe 10, 20 seconds from yourself, Nuri, and Jake, if you wouldn't mind just any final comments or a response to that particular question. Nuri, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Yeah, sure. I suppose into the final question, I was going to add that at the DT Hub, we do have the Gemini Firebox, which is an accelerator style initiative at the DT Hub, so we're bringing together these innovators and infrastructure owners to really solve these challenges as described. Where we see it is not really just about creating a proof of concept demos, but it's really about participant co-creation and creating market-ready solutions. So that's one of the ways we're looking to address that by working directly with infrastructure owners. So we hope to that will enable fast track adoption and allow people to showcase what is possible for future industry decision makers. But it's ultimately one of the areas that we're looking to address as well.
Thank you, Nuri. And any final comments from yourself, Jake, before we close?
Yes, I think in relation to that question is understanding common problems across the ecosystem. I think the scenario they described is challenging. Common problems, common value. I think mapping the ecosystem and then being able to identify those hooks, because then you can come up with a common solution. But I think you need to have engagement, and which may be the initial challenge with the various stakeholders. But if they've got common problems or individual problems which can be solved through collaboration of the ecosystem, then that could be a way of unlocking the value proposition of doing a digital twin, and then you'll get engagement, or possibly get engagement.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for your insights, panel. Thank you to the audience for joining. Like I said, the announcement for hoodies, look out for that. That will be Friday. But for now, we'll wish you all a very good day and hopefully speak again soon. Bye-bye.